Welcome to the Mike Litton Experience Podcast. Mike has over 31 years experience in real estate, finance, and investing. He's passionate about being a father, a teacher, a realtor, an investor, and a leader. Everyone has a story, and our passion is to help them tell it. And now, introducing the host of the Mike Litton Experience, Mike Litton.
So what can you expect from the Mike Litton Experience? You can expect stories that will inspire, motivate, advice that will sharpen your focus, and expert information on real estate, finance, and market conditions. Amanda Hess, thank you so much for being our guest on the Mike Litton Experience. I cannot thank you enough for making time for us today. I'm super excited about our time together. As we talked about before we hit record, everybody has a story, and our passion is to help them tell it. And so with your permission, what we're going to do is we're going to have you start with where you were born, go all the way up to today with your life story, and then we'll talk about anything you want to talk about that you're working on today and or for tomorrow. Is that cool?
That sounds amazing. I'm excited.
I'm so excited to have you here. So I know that your story is going to inspire and motivate a lot of our listeners, and I'm super excited for that. So where were you born?
I was born in Calgary, Alberta, which is in Canada.
Okay.
Yeah. Lived
So
there
did you grow up there?
I did. Yeah. I lived there my whole life until 2020. So in
Oh,
2020, when the pandemic hit, my husband and I kind of looked around and went, we could do this anywhere, and
yeah.
decided to move to British Columbia. So we moved to a small city in British Columbia called Kamloops, and it's
Okay.
got about 100,000 people, whereas in comparison, Calgary, has 1.6 million.
Right.
So very
Large,
big
large city.
difference.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's where I started, and that's where I am now. We just really wanted a lifestyle change, and it's been a pretty cool transformation moving here. But my roots are in Calgary. I love Calgary. It's a beautiful city. There's amazing people that live there. I have nothing but love for Calgary, that's for sure.
So let me ask you a question. What was your favorite thing about growing up in Calgary?
That's such a great question. I think Calgary had a lot to offer from the standpoint of it had a little bit of everything.
Hmm.
So you have the mountains nearby, you have the mountains right there. So you can get out into the mountains and do all of those things, but so much opportunity. And, one of the things that I remember about Calgary when I was younger, and it's not really that way now, but when I lived there, it was kind of like a small city when I was younger. There was a nice vibe in Calgary. It was very friendly, wasn't showy, just a lot of people that were really down to earth is how I sort of saw it, and in all honesty, how people used to talk about it.
Yeah.
So
So
that's,
it's
I
kind
think,
of a
one of the big
feeling,
things.
kind of a feeling of community.
Yeah, there really was. They have the Calgary Stampede there. I don't know if you're familiar.
I am.
I love the Stampede. My mom loved the Stampede. So we would always go. We would always go. We do all the rides, but we'd also check out the horse barns and the donkey barns, and we'd check out all the animals and everything else. And I think the Stampede was such a cool place. You would just have people that were so friendly and so willing to talk to anybody and everybody about everything. There was just an openness that really was there. I feel like it's not as much so there anymore now that it's grown. That could just be also, though, because I'm 47. You know, you have a different view of the world than when you were, say, like 20.
Yeah. Or 12, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So growing up, who was the most influential person to you?
The most influential person to me was my mom, for sure. She's a big part of my life. She was a stay-at-home mom. When I was younger, I figure skated, and so that was a big part of our life, and she was the one that did that with me. My dad was really doing hockey with my brother. And then when my parents moved to an acreage, and my mom had always wanted to have horses, so when they decided to get horses, we had, horses on our property. I worked at the stable that was nearby, and my mom was just a big part of that. I spent a lot of time with her, so she was really influential in my life growing up, for sure.
So in high school, what was your favorite subject?
Probably English,
Yeah.
actually. I mean, it was the easiest for me. I was an avid reader, always had been. My parents were both big readers as well, so it was something that I grew up having in front of me, and actually really struggled in school. I would say that socially, it was a real hard thing for me growing up in school, and books was the way that I could escape. You know, you can always open a book,
Hmm.
and back then there were no phones. So you didn't have access to all of these other things, right? You really just had your own thoughts, which sometimes weren't that nice, or you could open a book. And so English for me, it was something that came really easily, and I
Yeah.
think that that's part of the reason why I liked it. I mean, it's nice when things are easy for you sometimes, and it was just easy to understand, and I could really excel at it, which
And you
is
can relax too. When you're reading a book, you can just relax and just fall into that world, right?
yeah, and, it's really served me growing up. I will say that where I'm at now, I have my own podcast as well, and I think I speak well. I've been told I speak well, but, there
You do speak well.
some people might disagree.
You do
Um,
speak well.
but
When I grow
thank
up, I want
you.
to be just like you.
But, I think reading really helped with that. I try to instill that in my own kids, but they're just really not that interested in reading, and it's fascinating because they wanna get good grades in subjects like English, and the truth of the matter is if you want good grades in English, the best way to do that is it's just reading, it's just volume.
It really is. Practice makes perfect, right? And reading what somebody else has put on paper prepares you to be good at English. It's that simple.
It's true.
This is what grammar sounds like, right?
Right, yeah, I mean, obviously, you're also a very proficient speaker, and, you know, that is the truth of the matter. The more that you read, the more words you hear that you don't understand and you don't know what the meaning is. Then you have to go look it up so you know what they're talking about. Your vocabulary increases. Your ability to explain how you feel or, what's going on for you is just much greater.
Yeah.
And it's pretty cool. So for me, I know that one of the things that I think people find hard with English is the aptitude part of that, right? And for me, the aptitude was always really easy. Now, do I think that I have a tendency towards being good at that? Of course, right? Because if I'd have really loved math, I'd probably would have been all about math, but I was
Right.
not.
Right.
But I was all about English and I was all about reading, So it's been, yeah, really cool for me.
That's cool. So let me ask you this. And I know you said that you figure skated.
Mhm.
Or any other sports or any other extracurricular activities you did in high school?
Well, actually in high school, so figure skating I did from the time I was about 5 until I was about 15.
Mhm.
Um, we moved to an acreage when I was 15, so my parents really told me I had to decide riding or skating, not both, which sounds really bougie. I know it kind of is. But I I really was burnt out by skating at that point. I skated 6 days a week. I skated 3 to 5 hours a day and I was all done, and
Mm.
horses just sounded perfect. So, the only real activity that I did in high school, in all honesty, was riding. I mean, it was my whole life because I had my horse, but then I worked at the stable that was actually kitty corner to my high school because we moved out to the country just outside of Calgary.
Mhm.
And I rode every day. I mean, I cleaned stalls every day. It
Mhm.
wasn't that bougie. It was a lot of poop and a lot of sweat and a lot of really hard work and a lot of times in climates that are not all that nice.
Yeah.
But that was my whole world. It's a very physical thing and it was really immersive and really good for me at a time when I was really struggling socially. It was a good escape.
Yeah, it sounds like it. So, I grew up on a farm in Oklahoma, and
Okay.
I farmed with my grandfather for 9 years, and I told my kids when they were growing up, I said, "If I had a time capsule or a time machine, I would send you back and you would work on the farm with granddad.
Yeah.
We don't have that, and you're gonna have a significantly higher standard of living than I had when I was a kid.
Mhm.
So here's the deal. If you even remotely sound like you're sounding entitled or spoiled or whining or any of that kind of thing, I'm gonna take you physically out to a local horse ranch and you're gonna muck out stalls for free, okay?
Love it.
Until you don't feel entitled anymore,
Mhm.
right? And
Yeah,
so
yeah.
every time they would start to whine or start to sound right, anything, you ready to muck out some stalls? Right? When they found out what the mucking part was, what the actual part was they'd be shoveling, right? They
Yeah,
were like,
yeah.
"Ew," right? It builds character. It builds
It
character.
it builds character, and I think it probably builds your immune system. I mean, when I
Oh,
think back, I'm like, I'm not sure how much manure I ingested, but I'm thinking a lot.
yeah, probably a lot. Probably a lot.
Yeah.
So after high school, where do you go?
After high school, I went to university. I went to the University of Calgary. It's funny, I did wanna go to university. I wanted to go to veterinary school, I can say it, vet school.
Mhm.
Um, I think I liked the idea of being a vet because I was gonna be around animals, but I didn't really think about the course load that would lead there.
Right.
So, I was an honor student in high school, but it wasn't because I knew how to work. It's because
Right.
I was smart.
Okay.
Ish. I knew
Okay.
how to work the system. I
Okay.
knew in high school that you could just I was proficient enough in high school to be able to show up, pay attention in class, and get good grades. I just didn't have to work for it. So, when I went to university and my course load was, first of all, advanced physics. I do not know why my high school counselors told me that's what I should take, considering it was my worst subject. Calculus, biology, chemistry, English. It was a shock.
Yeah. Yeah. It really
And
is.
I mean, the course load was enormous, just the amount of reading that you had to get through, and you weren't getting through that in class. After class, you have to read it. But not
Yeah.
only do you need to read it, you need to understand it
Right.
because, hey, guess what? In 2 more days, you're gonna go back and it's gonna be another boatload of work,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
And if I went now, I'd be fine. I would know
Yeah.
how to do it. But back then, I did not. I really everyone talked about how mature I was, and I wasn't mature at all, which is really interesting, right? I knew how to please the adults around me.
Mhm.
That doesn't work in university.
Yeah.
That just doesn't work. And I also, because I struggled so much in high school, and I honestly believe because I am so honestly neurodivergent for sure, like that's something I identify with. I outwardly process my emotions. I have sensory processing issues. There's just an awkwardness sometimes that comes along with it that
Mhm.
really isn't celebrated in school with your peers, right? And so when I went to university, I started learning that I could really mask that with drinking. So I did. And so I partied a lot in high
Wow.
school in university, not in high school. Um, and I just was on a journey of, I think, self-discovery fueled somewhat by alcohol. And I spent a couple years in school, kind of scraping by with C's and B's. Didn't graduate. Actually met my boyfriend at the time, who we then got engaged. And I will say he convinced me to drop out, but it's not like it was too hard for me to be convinced to drop out at that point.
Yeah.
I really didn't know what I was doing there.
Yeah.
It was
So
just
can I
lost.
can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
The alcohol, the drinking,
Mhm.
were you masking pain?
I think masking pain and then also masking how I was, Now I know so much more about myself. I recognize that I'm actually quite introverted, but I do enjoy other people, but in small chunks of time. To
Mhm.
be in a big group with a lot of people, I can do it and I'll excel. You would never know because I'm so good really at masking
And
that.
adapting, yeah.
Right? I am.
Yeah.
I can be a chameleon in that environment. That's not a good long-term thing for me because I actually need time to reflect. I need time to be by myself and I need time to really think about what am I going to decide about this? How do I want to show up? I need a lot of reflection to be able to feel comfortable being myself.
So the chameleon part,
Mhm.
did that cause pain?
Yes, because I wasn't what had happened, I think, for me is that for a long time, there was a story that I still carry with me, which is I don't belong and I don't fit in, and
Okay.
people don't like me. Um, so when I was in university, I worked really hard for people to like me.
Okay.
So what I discovered is if you're the fun party girl,
Mhm.
people like you.
Yeah.
And I think that that was for me the biggest drive was all I cared about was that people liked me and that I fit in.
Hmm.
That's all that mattered. Nothing else mattered to me because it felt so bad to be so severely bullied for so long. So it's, I think, a survival response. I think it's a thing that we do to try and adapt. Like, I think we do adapt because we want to feel good. Human beings want to feel safe.
You want to be accepted.
Yeah. And so I found a way to be accepted, except that it was such a toxic way to be accepted. It's
Yeah.
not, it doesn't come with like consistency. When you have too much to drink, you're not that much fun.
Hmm.
And when you're hungover, it's hard to really do anything. And
Right.
so really just navigating that. And I wouldn't say that I was an alcoholic per se, but I would say that I abused alcohol, which
Hmm.
a lot of university students do,
Oh,
right? This is
sure.
not like an uncommon story. But just noticing for me that university, a lot of people will say, "Oh, it was so much fun." And I look back and I'm like, I don't know if it was fun." Um, but I did discover a lot. I think it needed to happen.
Yeah. Part of the process of life
Yeah,
and learning about yourself.
100%.
Yeah. So one of the things that I've noticed in life is people who were bullied tend to swing the other way. Like they tend to get over here to where they are desperate for approval. They're desperate
Mhm.
for acceptance. They're desperate for all these things. And that desperation is pain. And they reach
Yes.
out to things that help to numb that pain and that help to, for lack of a better term, enable that behavior, right? Because if you're not tipsy, you might not be as easily the fun party girl, like you're saying, right, where you're
Yeah.
trying really hard and that kind of thing. So yeah, wow, that's quite a journey. So you get engaged,
Mhm.
pop out, then
Yep.
what happens?
Well, then I was in an abusive relationship. So
Oh my gosh.
that was not
So
a
that
good.
same fiance
Mhm.
that convinced you to drop out.
Yeah, lots of controlling behavior. Lots of really terrible things kind of that went on. I mean, he was not a physically abusive partner, emotionally, verbally, very manipulative. It was just a mess. I remember we would have these fights and they would just be just these enormous screaming matches.
Hmm.
And the one day I'll never forget, we were engaged and then he told me that he wasn't going to marry me and he was so cold. And, I remember calling my mom and my mom being like, "I'm going to come get you, come home," which I did. But then my mom had gone for surgery. Um, and I started talking to the fiance again and started talking to him. And when she found out, she was really upset and she was in the hospital. And my dad found out and he kicked me out of the house because
Oh
I
wow.
had upset my mom when she was sick. It was just a mess,
Yeah.
right? I mean, looking back, like I look at people that are in abusive relationships and I'm like, it's really easy to have an opinion when you're not in it
Yeah.
because it's a slow progression. It doesn't start the way that it finishes,
Right.
you know?
Right.
And you're if you think about where I was at in that moment, right? At that stage of my life, I had been bullied to the point where all I cared about was people liking me.
Yeah.
All I wanted was to be accepted and validated. It's not surprising that I found a boyfriend that was manipulative,
They
right?
took advantage of
Because
that. Yeah.
that just happens. And the one thing, like I did
Well,
a
and they have
strategy.
radar for that,
Yeah, yeah,
right? They seek people out.
definitely.
I mean, it's scary.
And what's so crazy about it, I mean, I heard this psychologist, I read her book. It's such a good book. It's called Sexy But Psycho, and I love it.
We hope you enjoyed another episode of the Mike Litton Experience. If you did, do us a favor, smash that subscribe button, tell your friends, family, and coworkers about our program, and wherever you get your podcasts, please leave us a rating. It helps us to connect with quality people just like you.
And that's a wrap. Another episode of the Mike Litton Experience in the books. Reach out to Mike on Instagram at Litton Realty. Want to meet with Mike? Check out calendly.com/Rio760.